Hi there, welcome to Bourbon Turntable. We are the show where we blend the love of music with the love of whiskey. I'm Kevin Rose, and I'm joined tonight by Drew Crowley. What's up, Drew?
Howdy, guys. How we doing?
Doing well, doing well. Sounds like from what you were saying in the pre-show chat, you had a busy night. So
Did
we'll
did
try to
still recovering.
we'll try to take it easy on you. And Benjamin Eaves, uh, the newest resident of the state of Kentucky. Welcome to the Bluegrass, sir.
Thank you. Very cool to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your new gig and the move.
So right now I am temporary location, a undisclosed bunker somewhere in the state of Kentucky. So I've been trying to break into the distilling industry, the spirits industry for a little while here. Been hired on at Kentucky Artisan Distillery. They're just outside of Louisville, and starting at the bottom and working my way up, hopefully, with the bottling line and production there. So very excited to be able to work with the folks there. If some of you in the whiskey world are familiar, they're the producers of Jefferson's bourbon. That whole line that they do there, they have a couple of items that they produce on their own, Billy Goat Strut and Whiskey Row, and they do a lot of contract distilling, so they've got a lot of stuff coming in and out. So it's an exciting place to be a part of. So really looking forward to that, and looking forward to being here in Kentucky. And so hopefully soon we may not have to remote. We can all kind of get together and do some shows and things. So looking forward to that as well.
Yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. Well, congratulations, welcome, and we're excited for this new adventure for you. And bottling line, I guess, is a little ahead of mailroom, so that's good.
Right.
That's good. Right. So
there's a lot of distillers got their start in the bottling line. So
absolutely.
So
everybody has to start someplace, and that's a really good distillery that you're getting in with, and I know it'll be a great opportunity for you, and you'll do great with it. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Yep.
So speaking of Ben and the stuff that he's got going on, we've got a blind tasting that he's going to lead Drew and myself through.
Yes.
If I can secretly get this poured without you guys seeing.
He said on the little bottle, he says Eve's blind, not Mary Ann.
That's right.
So no nondescript black
no black box with the
black
blue
box,
tones. Yeah. Curious to see what you guys think of this one.
Any clues off the bat?
Take a hit on the nose and see what you think right away.
Ooh.
What territory does this put you in?
I'm definitely getting kind of a cereal grain note, almost Honey Nut Cheerios type thing.
Okay.
A little bit sweet and a little bit smoky, but maybe Honey Nut Cheerios or Honey Bunches of Oats, kind of smell the box kind of a thing. The grain comes out strong for me.
I think
you're spot on with that. Yeah.
I got the honey thing for sure.
I get that smoky char coming off of there as well.
It's different.
It's like a bit of honey.
Almost a honey roasted peanut.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yep. Maybe a little bit of apple in it.
Like a cooked apple? Or more of a fresh apple to you?
Maybe like a fried apple.
Okay.
Apple butter, something like that.
See that? Apple butter, I get. That one sticks out with me. Yeah. I had initially thought more like pear, like Bartlett pear type thing, but I think apple is the right note. Once you said that clicked for me.
Apple butter, even I could see like a stewed pear with a little bit of baking spice going on there too.
It's definitely got a silkier, more sticky mouthfeel. Not oily, viscous, like coat your mouth, but like kind of clings to it, back corners of my tongue. I still get a little bit of that honey note coming through. But mostly what I noticed upon first encounter was just texture was super rich.
Right.
It kind of starts in the middle of your tongue and then spreads out.
I think that's a good descriptor for it. It's pretty, I find it fairly intense on the palate, but it broadens out. I get a lot of spice, a lot of pepper hitting the cheeks.
Yeah, as it broadens out, I get that pepper in there, and it starts out sweet like it does on the nose, and then the sweet kind of fades away.
What's the back end like for you? I'm having a hard time pinning that down.
I get that pepper, and then a little bit of the apple comes back, but there's not, I don't get a whole lot on the finish with it.
Yeah, it's like lightly sweet, like
I get
fruit sweet, but not a whole lot else.
Yeah,
lightly
jumps out
sweet.
immediately.
Yeah, lightly sweet. I get a little bit of leather. I get definitely some a tannic, kind of a drying hit to it, and a lot of pepper and spice.
Yeah, there's some oak to it. There's some oak to it. So the graininess at first made me think that it was not that old. When I taste it and I get that oakiness and that tannic note, it makes me think that it's been in a barrel a little while.
What would you guess at age if you had to guess, Kevin? I was going to say, 8 to 12, maybe somewhere in that range. But, in my palate, the 6 to 8 year is where that apple and that grain note start to kind of go away. They get rounded off by the oak, but it wasn't as unpleasant or as harsh maybe as some of the other things in that category were for me. So I'm thinking that the oak probably puts it a little bit older, or it was aged, high heat, potentially.
I'm guessing 6 to 8. That'd be my guess.
Okay. You guys have a guess as to distillery or state or anything like that?
My initial thought was Heaven Hill, but I'm pretty sure I'm off.
Okay.
Now.
I don't know. I'm trying to reason through what the state would be by the trip that you went on, Ben.
Okay.
Which is so I'm thinking Texas.
You could think Texas, and I would understand that because of the trip and because of my I won't say allegiance, but my passion for Texas whiskeys. I'll break down the mash bill for you. It's 84% corn, 8% rye, and 8% malted barley.
84, 8.
Don't know what that will tell you. It's also coming in at 112.2 proof.
Okay.
And if you're ready for a reveal, just let me know.
I'm ready.
You ready?
Yeah, let's hear it.
I want to know how off we are.
All right. So age-wise, you're getting pretty close. This is a 10-year-old. Forgate. They're batch 8, which is their Tennessee Foundation, 10-year-old Tennessee straight bourbon.
Yeah, that's good, man. Thank you for sharing.
Sure. That is one 4-gate that I've actually been really, really impressed with overall. I've enjoyed that one a lot. As you can tell by the bottle. I've also shared that one a good bit, but
interesting.
Messing around with some blend with a little nod to Marianne there, and going Tennessee for a little nod to you there, Kevin. So.
Very cool. All right, well, that's fun. I enjoyed that.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben.
Sure.
Yeah, I like doing those. We'll do more of those in the future for sure. So that kind of brings us to the end of side A of this show, but we will be coming back in just a few minutes after our break, where we will talk about grunge. And this is going to be fun. I've got my flannel shirt on and everything, so I'm ready to go. Ready to go. But before we get into our discussion on grunge, wanted to tell you guys about a couple of shows we've got coming up here soon. They are our year-end award shows. First one will be airing next week, December 8th, where we will announce our finalists for our whiskey of the year. Each of us will. And then we'll also go through our nominees for album of the year and song of the year, and we'll reveal what each of us had as the album of the year and the song of the year. It'll be a lot of fun. Hopefully it'll be some music that you'll be introduced to there that you may not have heard of before. Maybe it is something that you enjoy, and we'll look forward to hearing your comments on our selections and what your selections may be too. So that will be coming up next week. Be sure to like and follow and subscribe so you do not want to miss that. So now we're going to talk about some grunge. Ben, give us a little overview of the grunge era.
So grunge, which honestly, I think musically is a term that gets thrown around a little bit loosely. For music coming out of the late 80s, early to mid 90s time period. A lot of alternative style music, definitely a hard rock feel to it overall. Usually when you mention grunge, immediately people start thinking Nirvana. Kurt Cobain comes to mind because they're really one of the breakthrough artists that really brought grunge out to the forefront. Pearl Jam is another one. But there's a lot of other, I think, key bands that had to play in this. And I think there's a way to kind of define this and get this narrowed down a little bit more, because when you hear that general discussion, there's a lot of other bands that get tossed in that whole grunge category. And personally, I don't think they exactly fit there. But for me personally, this was probably one of the most impactful periods of music in my life. It's an era that I still go back to daily, if not weekly, and I'm pulling something from that period to listen to, whether it's lyrically, musically. There's just something that connects for me unlike any other period of music. So I'm super excited to talk about and discuss this era. But so yeah, we can break down what exactly grunge is, what bands, where it came from. I think there's a lot of cool things to discuss about this era.
Yeah. Yep. Drew, what are your thoughts on it in general?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the era where I was born, and so I didn't have this experience personally kind of as it was happening, but sort of later on, I think, Nirvana kind of came onto my radar via the Foo Fighters. So I was, late middle school, early high school. Was never really a big Pearl Jam guy, other than, I had a coach in high school that used to put on Pearl Jam records for us to do sprints to, because he liked to make us mentally tough to have to run to something with a different BPM than what we were running. But yeah, I never really had the personal experience with it until later, and then maybe I don't understand your definition here, Ben, so I could be wrong, but bands like Stone Temple Pilots, Soundgarden was not necessarily in the grunge vein exactly, but kind of influenced by that, and all bands that I enjoyed, just kind of dissecting later on as I came aware of them. So, yeah.
Well, there's one thing that is associated with grunge is Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
the Seattle sound was what it was called. So, in your mind, does a band that might have that similar sound but isn't from the American Northwest, can they be considered a grunge band? Somebody like Stone Temple Pilots, they're from San Diego, or Smashing Pumpkins, I think they were from Chicago.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So do they have to fit? Do they have to check that geographical box as well as that sound?
Personally, for me, yes, they do. I think it's tied to that location. It's tied to the community that was coming out of Seattle and that surrounding area. Bands like Stone Temple Pilots, because they came out, they became popular at around that same time. They got that grunge label slapped on them. But if you really listen to their sound and their style, obviously, they're California. They got more of a, in my opinion, what I call a Southern California post-punk kind of influence going on to their sound and their style. Smashing Pumpkins, you start breaking down. You can take certain songs and think, okay, they've got that heavy distortion going on, kind of got that grunge feel. Again, another band that broke out in the late 80s with their first album and then hit it huge with Siamese Dream in the early 90s, right when grunge really, kind of grabbed music by the collar and gave it a good shake. But if you really listen to their sound, it's very, very different. I lump them more as just an alternative rock band overall than trying to say they're grunge or they're this, they're that.
Yeah.
Pumpkins is very, I want to say genre bending, but just very hard to loop into one specific genre, so to speak, because they covered a lot of ground. But grunge got its start late 80s, coming out of Seattle. There was a whole different feel to the music community there than a lot of other places. These bands were not so much competitive with each other as they were just one big brotherhood. They were roommates together. They went to each other's shows and supported each other. They played together. They swapped around members in bands. They really just helped kind of congeal this whole feel. And it was really birthed out of the late 80s hair metal scene. So you've got that influence going on there. And then they tried to just, as other influences came in, they took that and sort of evolved it to create their own sound. So it's almost, if you wanted to define it in a way, it's like take some metal, take a little bit of hard rock, take some punk and a little bit of alternative and kind of mash that all together. And you've got grunge. Basically loud, distorted guitars, usually dealing with a lot of, foot pedal distortion, big clean amp with a lot of pedal distortion. And you've got that grunge sound. Throw in a bassist and a drummer and a vocalist, and there you go. Some flannel, cut off camos and combat boots, and we're off and running.
Yeah.
But
you're dealing with, you talk about the a little bit about the instrumentation. The drum kits were very much stripped down. It wasn't what you get from like Neil Peart. No, that
you're not in prog rock territory at all.
You could make 5 grunge band kits out of one Neil Peart kit.
Right.
And the vocals were a lot different as well. It wasn't usually stuff that's in a higher register, that kind of screaming. You got you did get a lot of growls, you got a lot of mumbles, maybe some REM inspiration there or something. But it was a very you could really check the boxes on how just the instrumentation and the vocals were set up as to did it fit grunge or not.
Right. So with hair metal, with a lot of metal, especially from the late 80s, you've got what they call kind of the scooped profile on the amp, where the mids are pulled way down, the bass and the treble is way up for the guitars, and that gave that really bright cutting sound. In the distortion with grunge, you've got those mids pushed up. Typically,
mids are all there.
It's just heavy in your face, full saturated sound, and a lot of from the style to the music to even the lyrics and the whole attitude of grunge was almost kind of a rebellious in your face to what 80s rock and roll had been, where you had this just over the top, Motley Crue, Van Halen, party hard. We are just, it's guitars, girls, and rock and roll and cocaine and everything else. Grunge was just like a total, like, we don't care about that. We don't want to be rock stars. We're here for the music. And, we're going to party hard and do our own thing. Obviously heroin was a big impact in the whole grunge scene, as a lot of the lead vocalists are now gone because of heroin addiction. But it was also lyrically, what I think was really interesting was where, you got Motley Crue singing about rock and roll all night and girls, 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 and all this stuff. Grunge was more about, introspection, dealing with a lot of your personal issues, social justice issues, like Pearl Jam, especially, started to kind of put that on the radar a little bit. And it wasn't just this, I don't know, how do you put it? Just this kind of vanity in rock and roll. It was like, there's something more, there's something deeper we're dealing with here a little bit. And I think that's what so many people connected with. And that's just, for anybody who came along in the grunge era, came of age, it's one of those moments in music where it's like literally you feel like overnight the whole music scene changed. I mean, just overnight. The only thing I can think to compare it to, I wasn't alive for this, is like maybe the British invasion, the Beatles, or when Elvis hit the scene. I mean, grunge kind of had that kind of impact on the music world because, one day we're all rock, we're Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses and Winger and just stuff like that. And then literally the next day it's Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains and Soundgarden. And wait, who are these other guys? Nobody cares anymore.
Right.
Everything from music video to radio, it just shifted overnight. And it was just wow. I mean, I can remember being in high school when this music hit, it changed everything culturally. Everything began to shift. And there's just a lot of really cool bands. I think for me, one of the interesting stories when you look at grunge, the one person you cannot overlook, there's a lot of bands that we can define as grunge. You got Alice in Chains, you got Pearl Jam, you got Nirvana, you got Soundgarden, you got Mudhoney, you got the Melvins, you got all these bands that kind of came out from that area, that influenced that sound, that shaped it. But if you start to dig, it kind of, the one person that was like the gel for this was a guy named Andrew Wood. And he was a lead vocalist for a band called Mother Love Bone. And some of the guys from Pearl Jam played for them. He was also roommates with the lead singer from Soundgarden. And he passed away from a drug overdose. And his loss to the community is really what kind of launched this whole thing. These guys got together, formed some different bands. There was a tribute band called Temple of the Dog that featured members of Soundgarden, members of Pearl Jam, I think maybe another guy or two, but they had a couple of hits with that, and it started to just hit. Everybody looks at Nirvana and Kurt Cobain. Yes, they made this thing a national sensation, but Andrew Wood is the guy. If you stop and break down how many bands wrote songs about Andrew Wood that became big hits from that grunge period, it's kind of ridiculous. I think I counted 5 or 6 at least that became major hits that were songs directly, a tribute to Andrew Wood that became hits during the grunge era. And that's, kind of a tribute to what he meant to these guys and to this community. And then out of his loss, birthed a whole movement of music that really kind of changed the landscape.
Yeah. There were 2 guys that were in Mother Love Bone, which they're having fun.
They are.
Right? They're having fun. Those guys are having fun. But there were 2 guys that were in Mother Love Bone that were also in a band that preceded that called Green River. That a lot of people say their Come On Down album was the first grunge album, but Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament were in. They were in Green River. They were in Mother Love Bone. They were in Pearl Jam, and they were in Temple of the Dog.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they, I want to look up the history of these guys specifically and just see what interviews or articles are out there on them, because they kind of were there at the beginning of it,
right,
and saw it pretty much all the way through, and so that's quite a legacy to have been in those very significant bands very significant bands in this movement, and I don't think a lot of people even know who they are.
I think there's a lot of bands, honestly, that come out of this that have some very underrated albums and songs and music that people have forgotten about. Mudhoney is a band that never got huge national acclaim, but locally they were a big band and they put out some great music. Again, a big part of the whole movement. Another band that they were kind of almost seen as a one-hit wonder, but really they had a few hits. And if you go back and listen to their album from top to bottom, for me personally, it's one I come back to all the time. It's Candlebox. Another one of those bands from that area, from the Seattle area, from that grunge period. Their sound kind of helped transition that metal to grunge feel, and their album top to bottom is absolutely outstanding. And again, they're another one of those bands that their big number one hit was again a tribute song to Andrew Wood. So just there's still a lot out there to explore with grunge that I think, modern radio, you hear the Nirvana song, you'll hear the Pearl Jam song, you hear the occasional Alice in Chains, you'll hear a Soundgarden song, but you only hear a little bit of what each band really did.
Right.
But you start to dig in and there's just some absolutely killer, fantastic music. And, obviously a lot of the things that they begin to influence as well. So,
yeah. So Drew, for you kind of started the Foo Fighters and worked your way back.
Yeah.
Fair statement.
Yep.
So when you're working through all of that and everything that's in that grunge era, what were the things that stood out to you, and what are the things that you keep going back to?
Great question. I think the gateway drug obviously was the Foo Fighters. I've said on the show before I was a huge fan. And then I really started to kind of get into music, I think middle of high school, just the place I was, emotionally and, in the maturing that happens in all of us around that time, wanting something real and authentic. That was kind of the desire and the pull for me. So I found that in a lot of different ways. I found that in, music by John Prine and Johnny Cash, but I also found that sort of in some of the grunge music. I didn't get as deep into the non-radio side of that, but I remember the one time, being absolutely captivated by a sound, and it was listening to Chris Cornell sing. And, for those of you that are familiar, Soundgarden and a few other bands, Chris Cornell was the singer there, but just one of, if not the, I think, most distinctive voice from that time period. And hearing him sing some stuff, that just really resonated with me at the time about, hurting and being in pain and all that kind of stuff. Most of it is melodramatic from my side of the chair, but still really kind of identified with that. And then it has become comfort food music, excuse me, is not the right term. But just a place where I know that's kind of home base in some ways, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm good here. And then hearing all the bands, of course, that influences, we'll talk about it at some point, I'm sure, but some of the industrial rock music that comes after grunge out of, Detroit and Chicago and a few other cities that's not grunge just because of the geographic requirement we talked about earlier, but really love some of that music as well, and can kind of tell those fingerprints are all over it. So, yeah.
The band that I probably like the most out of all of it is Soundgarden. I think their lineup, as far as the musicians, I think they're as strong or stronger than anybody in any genre, quite frankly. And I think the songs on their albums, they're all very strong. Everything's pretty solid. There's not a lot of throwaways there. So I really enjoy Soundgarden a lot. And it's just one of those that you're not getting that back.
Right.
Like we're not counting Stone Temple Pilots in this, but you're not getting them back either. I mean, they may still tour as Stone Temple Pilots, but it's not Stone Temple Pilots anymore. And,
right.
That's just the good thing about one of the things about Nirvana is that they didn't try to continue to be Nirvana when Kurt Cobain died. That was we're looking for a new lead singer now. No,
right.
No, you couldn't do
done.
that. You couldn't do that. It's over. So the grunge era was, I mean, obviously there's still influence there today, and some of these bands continue to put out music for a while, but it was relatively short-lived.
Right.
Maybe 10, 12 years.
Really, if even that. I mean, maybe you almost start to see by the time the mid, it came on. You could. Some people can point back to the mid 80s. It's really, to me, about 87 to 88, I think, is when you really start to dig back and see the formation of grunge take form of what it was. And then by the mid 90s, you've got post grunge, you've got new metal, you got a lot of different sounds and music coming on the scene that are starting to take over and change already. But I go back and look and go, would a lot of that even have happened if grunge had not happened first? In the way it kind of just, it's almost like it laid the groundwork for people to start to move into these new avenues of music. Because for me, grunge hit at a time period when I was probably neck deep in country and R&B were the two forms of music I was most immersed in at the time. And then grunge hit, and it connected on such a level, and it opened me up to alternative rock music in a way that nothing else previously had. And I've never looked back, honestly. I mean, still have a love of old country, and, I can appreciate good R&B and hip hop and everything else, but it's, I don't know. I've not been able to move away from the emotional connection that I get from good alternative rock and roll and hard rock like I do from grunge and everything after. Still love a lot of classic rock and everything else, but.
So what killed it? If it lived that short of a life, if it barely made it to its early adolescence at best, what killed it? Was it Cobain dying? Was that it? That kind of first domino to fall?
That's a good question. I mean, that's really a good question to think about. What caused the death of grunge music to a degree? And honestly, you always look for like a revival of musical styles. And I've kind of been waiting for metal's had its day coming back. I've been waiting to see when does grunge kind of have its day where you begin to see that influence really rolling back through. But what killed it, there's some things philosophically you could look at. Maybe part of it is just the nature of the musical animal itself. You're antithetical to being the rock hero just the nature of the music in and of itself almost lends itself to a death cycle, to not trying to continue to grow and get bigger and bigger. You consume yourself, and then you throw in the death of some key members, from Kurt Cobain with Nirvana. And I think another thing that impacted, that maybe have slightly stunted the growth of grunge a little bit, was the impact of Lane Staley with Alice in Chains. Mm-hmm. That was my personal favorite band from that period. Still personally one of my all-time favorite bands. That harmonic duo of Lane Staley and Jerry Cantrell is just, it's unbeatable in my opinion. And the way Cantrell wove in some blues into the hard rock was just a phenomenal sound. But, you know, Lane's, his drug addiction hit very early on. It kept them from being able to tour a lot. It kept them out of the studio a lot. Mm-hmm. We still have a good, there's still a few albums and a good bit of music that they did, but it kind of stunted them from a very early start. And, perhaps if that hadn't been an issue, I don't know. To me, Alice in Chains was set to be maybe one of the biggest out of that whole group, that whole lineup. But again, what could have been? So, and then how much of it is the nature of the beast with, the whole recording business, studios, whatnot. We've cashed in on this, and now let's figure out what the next thing is.
Yeah. If you're dealing with, if we're going under the assumption that most of the groups and the artists in this era, grunge era, were more interested in the music than the money, then I think that makes it harder to replicate.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Because what inevitably happens is something becomes popular, some sound, some style, and immediately every record company on the planet is trying to replicate that somehow and find people to replicate it. Well, because they're trying to cash in on it. Well, if the people that are making that music aren't that interested in cashing in on it, then it's going to make it a whole lot more difficult to bait people to come in and get involved with it. And to that point, I think Kurt Cobain was living in his car when Smells Like Teen Spirit hit number one.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, I think it did make it more difficult to spawn other people into it. Now, I think you had other bands that may not have quite fit the genre that tried to jump in on it, but it just didn't take. It didn't work.
And I think that gets to what Drew was talking about, the authenticity.
Yeah.
Because that's what drew people to grunge in the first place, was the authenticity of the music.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're just, that, for me, that's why I don't give a rip about top 40 or pop music, because most of it is just produced to get your dollar and to be a hit for a day and gone the next. And grunge for me was totally different. There was authenticity. There was real emotions. There was just people dealing with their real stuff in the music. Mm-hmm. And that's what grabbed me, and that's what's held me all this time. And I think when you're just trying to cash in on that, people can smell that rat, man. They can smell that, and they're not drawn to it. It's not going to last.
I wanted to bring that up because we were talking a few minutes ago about what killed grunge, and you look at a couple of the adjacent bands, so to speak, that kind of come right after this. They get a ton of top radio play. The ones that come immediately to my mind that are just kind of in that vein, but even though they don't fit the definition, is a band like Green Day or Slipknot. You got both of those guys, or both those groups of guys that sort of take a lot of the same sound engineering techniques, a lot of the same lyrical approaches, but it's packaged for radio play. Not necessarily top 40 in the case of Slipknot, but definitely for Green Day and a few others,
Right.
the All American Rejects, and it's appealing to that market in such a way that some of the more authentic quote unquote grunge bands never were. So I just wondered if you guys had any thoughts on that, kind of to both of your points from earlier, if that had anything to do with this grunge thing kind of disappearing.
Potentially, and I think that's part of just the whole radio and music kind of cashing in, because a lot of what people classify as the post-grunge music, new metal began to come out of this. So Korn got came and launched that whole genre of music. Yep. So then you got Korn and Disturbed. There's bands like Fuel and others that kind of came out of that whole time period. That to me, Korn was one thing. They were interesting early on. Musically, and then a lot of their stuff for me just starts to sound the same. But other bands, it sounded like overproduced radio candy, basically, and it didn't have the authenticity, it didn't have the feel to really stick. And that's again back to authenticity, and maybe that's just the nature of the beast. It's kind of like. So I want to play off one of my other favorite bands is Tool, and the thing I love about Tool is from their first album, Opiate, to where they are with their latest album, you see this maturity and development, not just of their sound, but lyrically and emotionally of what they deal with. And if you heard interviews with Maynard early on, he said the first two albums were like his primal scream. He was dealing with a lot of internal struggles and problems. But he's like, you know what? You can't live there. If you do, you die. You learn to deal with it, you grow up, and you move on. And so a lot of their music lyrically now is actually much more positive if you begin to break it down, and versus early on. But I get from a lot of people and a lot of fans like, man, I love their first couple of albums, but I'm not so into the later stuff. And it's just because you want to hear that scream, you want to hear that anger, you want to hear that rage, but you can't live off of that. It's kind of, I think of the same thing with Rage Against the Machine. They didn't last long. And these guys were fighting with each other very early on from the formation of the band. You can only live off of anger for so long before it becomes self-destructive, personally. And that's what I think the nature of the music itself lends itself to being somewhat self-destructive. You can only ride that wave for so long. And as a person, if it's something you connect with, you can only ride it for so long before you got to deal with those personal demons and kind of work through some stuff, and you mature and you move on. And like you said, Drew, for me, it's kind of like comfort food. It's like I don't know, it's like home base. It's where I can come to, but I don't dwell lyrically in that music like I did when I was a teenager.
Right.
You've grown up, you've moved on, you've dealt with that stuff, and if you haven't, then I'd seriously suggest you get some therapy. But so I think just the nature of the music and the subject matter and what it dealt with lends itself to kind of burning itself out, if you will, because you can't linger in that forever. And I think those bands can't. So.
No, I think that's a good point, because one of the things there's a lot of music that is really dark, and I don't stick around with it that long. I'll take it in pretty small doses, because I don't want to feel that way. That's not the things that are the subject matter in those songs. That's not where I am. That's not my truth. That's not what drives me. Now, I think the music that's been crafted in a lot of cases is fantastic, and I want to enjoy that. But just getting stuck in that and not being able to get out, I think that can take you to a pretty dark place and keep you locked up there. And that may be what's going on with grunge and why it didn't last. It may have been just it had to eventually collapse upon itself just with the subject matter.
Kind of like the French Revolution in a way. It made a big bang, but it pretty much devoured itself, And in a lot of ways, as a huge grunge fan and as a huge grunge, of that era and that music, And it kind of it hurts me to look back and realize, but it was very self-destructive and self-consuming, because you look at so many of the lead guys, and not just the lead guys, but members of the bands, they're gone.
Yeah.
You know, Eddie Vedder with Pearl Jam, out of all the major bands, you know, that made it through, he's like the last guy left.
Yeah.
You know, Lane Staley is gone. Kurt Cobain is gone. Chris Cornell is gone. A lot of the bandmates that these guys played with, they're gone.
Yeah.
You know, Alice in Chains, I went through a couple of drummers. Obviously, the dude with Scott Weiland with Stone Temple Pilots, not grunge, but you know, he's gone.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of these guys didn't last. They burned out pretty quick, and you know, part of me is, yeah, that was the nature of the music. That's what it was about. I think that's why it had such a huge impact. But you look at guys like Maynard with Tool that, you know, said, you know what, I got to deal with this stuff. Let's deal with it and mature and move on. And that's the healthy thing to do, to just try to live in that.
Right.
It's not self-sustaining. That's just the bottom line. And that's how I look at Rage Against the Machine, that you can have that political rage and anger all you want, but it's not self-sustaining. It becomes a negative force that eventually consumes you.
Yeah.
Bottom line. So.
But all that being said, the music coming out of here, this time frame with these bands was fantastic, and doesn't necessarily get the credit that it should. And I think that it's important that that people be able to discover this and learn about these bands and the music that they made, because, like we said, a lot of the guys that were making this music, they're gone. It's not like you're going to go see Chris Cornell playing at, you know, a residency at the Caesars Palace in Vegas. It just isn't happening. He ain't here. Same thing with Cobain. You know, you're not going to see a 55-year-old Kurt Cobain playing at the Beacon Theater in New York. It's just not happening. So there's no way for young people today to see that, to connect to that, and then say, oh, okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to listen to all this. The best chance you have of that is exactly what happened to Drew. Is you get hooked into the Foo Fighters, and then you say, hey, if that guy that played drums for Nirvana, if he had a beard, he looked like the lead singer of the Foo Fighters. And then you just kind of get into that and you go with it. But at some point, you know, the Foo Fighters they're already slowed down a bit, but they're still making great music. We'll talk about that more next week. But they're not going to go on forever. So how do you keep that going? We'll submit this show to the archives for generations to go back and listen to, and to learn about grunge and learn about some of the bands in it, because it's a very significant turning point for American music. It took that punk metal and it brought it and it grew it up. And
I would add this quickly, Kevin. If somebody's out there listening and they're going to go back and try to discover grunge on their own or rediscover it, get past the radio hits. Get past a little bit of ear candy. Like Candlebox is a fantastic band. You will hear one song of theirs that gets played on rock and roll radio. They had at least two other big hits that were as equally good or better, and their whole album is worthy of listening. And that's the same thing for most of these grunge bands. You hear the radio hits and you think that's great. Go dig into the album, because reality is some of their best songs were never played on the radio. That's Pearl Jam included, Alice in Chains, Nirvana, Soundgarden, all of those. They got some incredible albums that's just loaded top to bottom with fantastic music.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. We're caught up, I think, in a culture now of make a playlist, throw in your hit songs and go, instead of just digging in and exploring an album. And that's for me, musically, is what I'm about. Give me the album and I'm going to listen to it top to bottom.
Yeah.
So I love the whole concept. I want to hear their concept. I want to hear what they're doing. And chances are the music you discover is way better than what's actually being played on the radio as a single.
Right.
So,
right. And that's a great point. And I think, we do a playlist for each show, and we put it in the notes and on YouTube and Facebook. So I think this time when we do that, let's pull together. Yeah, we'll throw out some of the hits from these guys.
Sure.
But let's dig into some of the deep cuts on some of these albums, and do just exactly what you're talking about, Ben. Allow people that may not be familiar with this genre. This is the way you can get familiar and hopefully fall in love with it and explore it and enjoy it just like we have.
Yep. That sounds great.
Very cool. Any other thoughts on grunge? I will tell you, like you guys said, there are certain bands that are kind of reset buttons for me.
Yeah.
I may be listening to a lot of different things, but then to just kind of bring me back to center. Tom Petty, the Heartbreakers is one, and Soundgarden is another one to me that does that. Just kind of let's kind of bring back in and just focus on some things that you enjoy, and then keep exploring. So
right,
really good stuff. All right, well, Ben, talk to us a little bit about the social media availability of yourself and Bourbon Turntable.
So I am Benjamin Eaves. I'm a part of another show called My Whiskey Den. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Facebook, and you can find us on Instagram. And the same for Bourbon Turntable. I'm also at Runnin' Whiskey. You can follow me there. You can find me again on Facebook. Bourbon Turntable. We are in the same places: Instagram, Facebook. We're also, I believe, we're starting to be available on a lot of the podcast feeds. So you can catch us there. If you can't watch us, you can listen to us even better, because you don't want to see these beautiful faces all the time. But Kevin and Drew, you guys are also on Instagram. Drew Crawley 63, Kevin 7673, and I am Ronin Whiskey. So
there, yeah,
yep,
yeah. So Drew, wait, which way did it go? Drew, tell us what we got coming up next week, please.
All right. Well, next week's show is bound to be a good one. We're talking some music awards for the end of the year. We'll have a whiskey awards show the following week. Looking forward to that as well. But all three of us have a great amount of difference and some surprising similarities in our taste in music for this year. So we're talking album and song of the year, some of the stuff that spoke to us the most. So really, really excited for that show in particular.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. A whole lot of fun. Well, Ben, Drew, it's been a good time talking about grunge. To everybody out there, on behalf of Drew and Ben and myself, thank you for joining us. Please tell your friends, leave your comments. We always enjoy seeing those, and we'll respond to you as well. So till next time, when we're talking about our year-end awards for music, cheers, love, and free bird.
Cheers, fellas.
Cheers.
Cheers. Good night, everybody.